afternoon. It's Monday, the 9th of October 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio, Patrick Henningsen. I'm sorry, Patrick, I got your name wrong on the lower third there. Right, we're also joined today by Vanessa Beeley. Welcome to the programme, Vanessa.
Hi.
Okay, well, we're going to get straight into things with this journalist. This is a journalist called Olivia Solon, who works for The Guardian. And Vanessa, you received a communication from her just prior to over the weekend, which said this: Hi Vanessa, I've tried contacting you and so on. We're planning to publish a story on Monday about the people who believe that the White Helmets are terrorists and propagandists promoting an imperialist agenda. We would really like to include your voice within the story, and so I'm including the key points below. I also have a few further questions which I've pasted in at the bottom. It'd be great if you could respond to this email by 10 p.m. On Sunday night, which is last night. Please respond to them by number and we will carefully consider any comments you make. If you do not choose to respond to the numbered points by Sunday evening, we will proceed on the basis that you have no comment you wish to make. And the first point is that you form part of a truther campaign dedicated to exposing the White Helmets as having links to terrorists and being a propaganda vehicle for pushing US imperialist agenda. They are, in your view, part of a movement to demonise and destabilise the Syrian government. 2, that you attract an enormous online audience amplified by high-profile right-wing personalities and appearances on Russian state TV. 3, the Syria campaign argues that your work forms part of a disinformation campaign that is putting the lives of peaceful humanitarians at risk. 4, some of the anti-White Helmet stories you and others publish centre around a few isolated incidents, including, and they list a couple of incidents which we can discuss shortly. 5, some White Helmets have been photographed carrying weapons to defend themselves despite marketing themselves as unarmed. 6, there is also footage of White Helmets taking a body away from an execution carried out by rebel militants, which you claim shows they are assisting executions. Others say that the White Helmets are called to retrieve bodies after execution so they can be buried according to Islamic ritual. 7, the anti-White Helmets campaign is supported by Russian-led propaganda machines, which help shape public perception in favour of Assad, raising questions about chemical weapons attacks. 8, that you went to Syria for the first time in 2016. 9, that you describe your 2-hour meeting with Bashar al-Assad in Damascus in August 2016 as your proudest moment. 10, that you're one of the leading social media personalities promoting the idea that White Helmets are a terrorist support group and Western propaganda tool. 11, that you describe yourself as an independent, self-funded journalist but have gone on state-funded trips to Syria. 12, that you were invited on a trip to North Korea in September 2017 but were unable to attend. 13, that Assad is being demonized by the West as a means to drive regime change. She also has a few questions for you. Number 1, have you ever received any funding, payment in kind or free trips or gifts from Russia or Syria? 2, do you believe that Assad's army has committed any war crimes? And 3, even if you do believe the White Helmets are propagandists, do you believe they're doing any good work in rescuing civilians? That's a pretty comprehensive set of questions, Vanessa, and maybe we could begin by asking you what you think the purpose of this communication is.
Well, I mean, I think, as I said in my response to Olivia, this is a clear, very biased, slanted charge sheet against Syria and against Russia. And they've tried basically to implicate me in that charge sheet. And of course, to portray me as a truther, aka conspiracy theorist working for Russia, producing propaganda against a humanitarian organization. That if they could wrap more, what can we say, accusations into one package, they might have missed a couple on there. And then obviously to try and prove that I'm being funded to produce the evidence and the research and the analysis that I'm doing. So it's, I think what it is, it's also an attempt to find out what other information I'm working on, what other investigations I'm working on in order to glean that information from me. One, to flesh out the article, but also to give them a heads up on where I'm going in my investigation in the future. And of course, I'm not going to give her that satisfaction.
The timing of this is interesting. Now, the Guardian a year ago was absolutely vehement. Here we have the Guardian's. It's not an opinion piece by an individual. This is the Guardian giving their view on the issue of the Nobel Peace Prize and the White Helmets. So the Guardian absolutely on the side of the White Helmets in this, if there are any sides to be taken here. As we like to highlight, if we look at the comments section, we just find comment after comment after comment in this, redacted, removed, censored, because the Guardian obviously didn't like what was being said. So the question is the timing of this related, do you think, to the fact that the White Helmets for the second year in a row didn't actually win the Nobel Peace Prize?
I think it's related to a number of things. I think it's related to the increased public consensus that quite correctly, in my opinion, based on my in-depth research, that the White Helmets are a terrorist-affiliated organization. They are used by the governments that are funding terrorism inside Syria to achieve regime change and the destabilization of Syria. And they are being funded by those same governments, multi-million financed by those same governments to act. They have many roles to play inside Syria, but one of them is to act as basically human shields embedded with the terrorist organizations that are funded by the same NATO member states and Gulf states, to afford a sort of a protection for those terrorist entities, particularly on the front lines. We see the White Helmets always moving with the terrorist organizations, particularly Nusra Front, to the new front lines. We don't see them staying behind, as in East Aleppo, to maintain the protection of the civilians against the evil Syrian government, which is their storyline, let's remember. So if those civilians in East Aleppo were genuinely under threat from the Syrian government, why then did the White Helmets not stay to protect those civilians during that time? No, they left with Nusra Front to the new terrorist and extremist front lines, which are Idlib. And now we're seeing in Idlib the same generation of propaganda to protect the terrorist enclaves and headquarters and centers in Idlib. Exactly the same storylines and narratives and footage that we saw in East Aleppo that has been proven almost universally to be fake. So I think that is part of it. But I think also we're leading up to the media on trial event. And this has to be of great concern to media outlets like The Guardian that have consistently and systematically produced faux reporting on Syria, often based, let's remember, on the testimony from the White Helmets or from other al-Qaeda affiliates, whether they're activists, whether they're journalists, or, of course, from the various NATO member state-financed organizations like Aleppo Media Center in East Aleppo. So I think it's a real mixture of things. I think it's a fear that the public consensus is going out of balance. In other words, the majority now, the majority consensus is that the White Helmets are a fraudulent organization who are affiliated and working with al-Qaeda inside Syria and are funded by the same criminal rogue NATO member states and Gulf states that are trying to destabilize Syria. That's one. Two is this media on trial event that's happening on the 19th of October with John Pilger and, a number of academics, journalists speaking out against the media obfuscation, the corporate media obfuscation of particularly the war on Syria. But yes, there is a certain level of resentment. I'm quite sure that their plan for the White Helmets to achieve the Nobel Peace Prize, both in 2016 and in 2017, is behind it.
You've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to a couple of things that Vanessa said, just to kind of back up what she's saying. This is if you look at the way that the media deals with independence, for instance. You know, the fact of the matter is this, the main argument the mainstream media are using in defense of the official white helmets narrative is that there's a lack of corroborative evidence out there, and only Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett are the only ones on the planet who are saying these things about the white helmets, and it can't possibly be true, Mike, because otherwise other people would be saying it. How come no mainstream media outlets are reporting it this way? Which is a logical fallacy. But this is the logical fallacy that journalists at The Guardian or some American academics operate on. And so the reality is, what the media tried to do in this case is isolate these independent journalists to make it appear that they are alone and therefore not credible. This is sort of a standard attack procedure, which the media do not just for attacking independent journalists or people trying to expose the truth. Whistleblowers get this treatment as well, Mike. So this appears to be the Guardian's tactic here in order to paint them as not credible. The other problem with this is this idea of they'll try to characterize, the Guardian would love to characterize 21st Century Wire as a Russian-led propaganda machine. I feel flattered that someone would call us a machine, as small and as we are, running on shoestrings and cigarette papers. But to say that even if Russian state media or if RT is reporting on the white helmets, the fact of the matter is this: the Guardian has access to every piece of data that 21st Century Wire has, that Vanessa Beeley has, that Eva Bartlett, that the UK column has. They have access to the same information, the same data, but they chose not to do anything with it. They chose not to question the official narrative. They've dug so deep down their own rabbit hole with the white helmets, promoting them for the Nobel Peace Prize or their Netflix documentary and the Bana of Aleppo story. They've dug so deep down there that they will do anything. They will do anything as gatekeepers to try to attack any dissenters, to protect the party line on these two very important public relations set pieces for the Syrian war. And quite frankly, The Guardian has colluded with the British government, and so have other mainstream media outlets. The Foreign Office has been funding the White Helmets. There's an absolute conflict of interest there in terms of USA, UK, and EU funding and support of this so-called NGO. And then these same mainstream media outlets, rather than question that, will turn around and attack anybody who questions that. It's extraordinary.
Right. Well, look, this is part of the picture, and here's another part of the picture, and that is the issue of how children are being exploited, not just in Syria and not just as a result of Syria. But so let's look at this issue in general. This is something that UNICEF was pushing out today. A child is a child no matter what, and of course that's absolutely true. Stand with refugees and migrant children. And they pushed out a little video clip, and the one thing from the little video clip that you will see is that we're very interested in single eyes here, but this was the thing: burning houses, men with guns, and they're pushing the issue of Rohingya children. So let's have we'll just play this little video as we're talking here. If I'd been there, they would have killed me too. And what they're promoting is a young boy making some pictures with crayons, an 11-year-old boy, a Rohingya refugee, and it's all about the children now living in camps in Bangladesh, and how he uses the art to tell his story and to heal himself of the trauma that he's experienced. I've no doubt that that is absolutely the case. What I'm objecting to here, or what I'm raising here, is the fact that these children are being exploited in this way to push propaganda. So this is just one example. You've already mentioned the most heinous example from Syria, which of course is Bana of Aleppo. This is the New York Times this morning or yesterday. Bana from Syrian war zone to New York City. Then we've got another example here from Middle East Eye, from Aleppo to New York. Bana al-Abid meets Colin Kaepernick.
This is extraordinary. So this is a perfect example of big entertainment, big sports, Hollywood locking in with the corporate media apparatus, locking in with the state, locking in with the U.S. State Department, British Foreign Office sponsored sort of PR interests, if you will. So this is a total lie. This lie was promoted ad nauseum by The Guardian, The Telegraph, and every single other mainstream media outlet, CNN, everybody. They jumped on board with this whole Bana story. They're still pushing her. They're still exploiting her, Mike.
But it's all right, Patrick, because she's safe now.
She's safe, yes.
But I'm not sure what she's safe from. Now, look, Vanessa, the key point here is that a trend which I think possibly began with Aleppo and the Bana story, as we've seen from that United Nations story with the Rohingya, this is clearly something which is going to be used more and more often, the exploitation of children in this way. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on the use of children. You have been talking quite a bit about it, at least in respect of Syria, but what are your thoughts on the broader issue?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think you're quite right. It's extraordinary. I think it actually, it started with Alan Kurdi, the body of the child washed up on the beach coming in from Turkey. And that set off the entire, refugee divisions between particularly the left. And then we had Omran, of course, the famous injured boy in the orange chair in the ambulance, the image that went viral that was the face of the suffering of Aleppo. Bana came in some time after that when the Syrian Arab Army was actually advancing quite seriously into East Aleppo and towards full liberation of East Aleppo from the Nusra Front-dominated occupation. Bana, as we know, of course, just to let people know, of course, her entire family is linked to and working with the terrorist organizations in East Aleppo. So, this is quite an extraordinary, despicable exploitation of a child, not only by Western media outlets and by NATO-aligned NGOs, but by her own family. We knew from speaking to, for example, her neighbors in East Aleppo, when we went to visit her house, that the father's, Hassan Al-Abed, his entire ambition throughout the occupation of East Aleppo was to get to Turkey to meet Erdogan. So his child has been used as a tool to achieve his, whether it is political, whether it is military ambitions. And now what we're seeing is Matthew Rycroft, for example, the UN New York, shaking hands with Bana, getting her to autograph his copy of the book. We're seeing a sort of robotic performance by Bana at the UN, basically reading her lines and standing there like a little stick figure holding the UN flag. I mean, and then we have the Bana Al-Abed coloring book. So what we're seeing is a star of empire is born. Wherever Bana goes now, her path is decided for her. But not only that, but she, they're already calling her the Anne Frank of our generation. How many hundreds of thousands of children are going to be brainwashed by this story and then to be given the Bana Al-Abed literature, the Bana Al-Abed pens, the Bana Al-Abed pencil cases, we're seeing here the blooming of an entire PR and marketing campaign. And actually, very interestingly, we're also seeing that starting to happen with the White Helmets. We're seeing the White Helmet coloring books. We're seeing the White Helmet storybooks. So this is an extraordinary. And by the way, one of the things that I found out today was that one of the founders of Netflix, by the way, has as his relatives Edward Bernays and Sigmund Freud. So, this gives an indication of the extent to which these elements are being marketed, not only now and in Syria, but for the future. And actually, Patrick Corbett, an Australian, or used to be a journalist based in Australia, said to me this morning, this is like the classic fairy tale. Think about it. You have Assad as the evil monster. You have Bana as the innocent child, and then you have the White Helmets as the knights in shining armor coming in to rescue the injured child. This is what our media is. Our media is just becoming a very slick PR agency, and what they're giving us is effectively a fairy tale.
Yes. I just want to can you quickly go back to that Washington Post article, Siege of Aleppo. Okay, firstly, I just want to quickly, before we go forward, point out the Washington Post ran this as a cover story, as a headline. This is disinformation here. I'd complain to the Press Complaints Commission if there was one in America. I don't know if there is. Siege of Aleppo. That's technically inaccurate. There was no siege of Aleppo. There was the battle for East Aleppo. So immediately, this is how the mainstream media subtly spin everything to make it seem like the whole city of Aleppo was under siege by the evil Assad. So this is a lie, essentially, perpetrated by the mainstream media, and they all did it, Mike. Every single mainstream media outlet did perform that same little sleight of hand. Just wanted to point that out before we go ahead.
Absolutely. Now, Vanessa, of course, the use of children for media purposes is only one part of this puzzle, because the other part of the puzzle is the way that children are being moved around the planet, and many of them unaccompanied. And we've been at the column covering this issue of unaccompanied refugees, and particularly from Syria, but not exclusively from Syria, for quite some time. And the fact that so many refugees had come to the UK are disappearing. Now, this is the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, the so-called Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration. That's why the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration has a government.uk website, a gov.uk website, because they're independent, Patrick. He has begun work on an inspection into how the Home Office ensures it acts in the best interests of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And this is the second in what is intended to be a series of inspections focused on the treatment of children within the context of borders, immigration and citizenship. This inspection is going to look at the reception arrangements for the children, focusing on the support and information provided to the child, collation of information about the child and referrals to other parties, how the initial encounter and who that encounter is with affects the child. It's going to look at the Home Office's role in carrying out age assessments, and it's going to look at the views of the Home Office and stakeholders about whether granting unaccompanied asylum-seeking children status and leave to remain is in the best interests of the child, and the impact of granting such leave and the amount of information and support provided to children about it. At no point in this press release does it mention children going missing from care, as many of these children end up in care in the UK when they come here, because not all of them by any means have family in the country. And so many of them end up in care, and then they end up going missing from care. This is part of a broader missing from care problem in this country. But the trafficking of children for sexual exploitation and other equally nasty things has become big business, Vanessa, and this is also being driven through Syria and other wars around the planet.
Yeah, I think, we saw this, and I touched upon this in my article on Rashdin, the Rashdin massacre. And of course, what needs to be highlighted is that The Guardian and almost every other mainstream media outlet, who did they focus on during the Rashdin incident, was upon Al-Qadir Habak, who was the photographer seen on his knees, supposedly so terribly moved by the massacre that he'd seen happen around him, despite his clear involvement with the terrorist entities that actually orchestrated that entire massacre. And I'll be actually covering that in my part 2. But a number of those children are still missing, the ones that were piled in the back of the Nusra Front truck and taken away from their mothers at the scene. Now, there's varying figures, but I was told by survivors from Rashdin that 158 people are still missing. How many of those are children, I don't know. But every single one of these incidents is basically producing missing children. So where are these missing children going to? I mean, there was a video put out by the White Helmets, and in fact, I think it was yesterday, and it's a PR movie. But what you see them doing is carrying child after child after child from about the 6th floor on a building which has clearly not been hit by any sort of missile. And they're carrying these children, rough handling them down the stairs, filming it as they go. And of course, making all the usual noises about, rescuing them. But my question always is, when we see these videos with the White Helmets, we always see them with a disproportionate number of children without parents, without their mothers, without any relatives, and always surrounded by a large number of male White Helmets. Now, I know exactly what's going to happen now. They're going to produce a video showing a dozen white helmet female operatives with the children, because they're watching everything I'm saying. And I'd like to point this out to the white helmets right now, if you're watching. I know what you're doing, because when I mentioned the fact that you are a sectarian organization comprising only Islamist extremist elements, funnily enough, your vice president, Marwas, put out a video to the Oslo Freedom Forum claiming that you have in your ranks Christians, Shia. I mean, it's extraordinary. As soon as we make a strong point, within a few weeks, the PR machine that's running them steps in, and we see a response to that. They've even responded about the Real Syria Civil Defense, claiming that they are a military organization. So every single detraction that we're putting out there, their PR agency, because the white helmets, in my opinion, are not clever enough to work this out, but the PR agency is giving them the script. They're adding to the script.
Yeah.
So it's extraordinary. We can actually direct where this story goes by our own. So let's have a little clarity from them. Where are the parents of these children? Where are these children coming from? Where are they going to? Why were there 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children being carried down the stairs with no parental care? It wasn't an attack. There were no bombs falling. There was no dust. So where were these children being taken? And why were they being handled? If they were injured, why were they being handled like sacks of potatoes? You know, these questions are never asked.
Yeah.
They're just, these movies are just put out there, as we said, like, you know, the heroes, the Superman. I mean, the images are becoming more and more Hollywood, more and more fantasy. We're almost getting into cartoon land with the white helmets.
Yep.
And also, when we did a program, Vanessa, Eve, and I made the comment of how they don't use backboards and they don't really care for spinal injuries.
Oh.
And then all of a sudden, very soon after that, I saw the first sort of spinal injury equipment appear on the scene. So there is a kind of wag the dog in reverse sort of phenomenon that Vanessa was talking about, which is kind of extraordinary. But all these kids are just going to the tally, the mythical tally of they've saved 100,000 lives. I think it's now every month it goes up about 10,000. So I think it's up. Well, it's up to 110,000 now. I think. Yeah.
In Marwas, and this was another extraordinary thing, I actually watched his entire presentation, which was quite painful. I mean, again, we get the script again, 50 barrel bombs a day, each one a Richter scale 8. And as someone actually said, well, don't you think the neighboring countries might have picked that up on their seismometer? But also, I think he even increased the number of Syrians that President Assad had killed, personally killed, of course, to 720,000. In this presentation, you know, which got a round of applause from the audience. But actually what was interesting in this presentation, and I think that was August this year, was he basically begged the media outlets to give credibility to their reports and to help them battle against the propagandists who are basing their evidence against the white helmets on rumors and trying to cut off their funding. Now, that's actually a very telling message for me. Yeah. Because what it's actually saying is they are potentially hurting, right? And what they're saying is to the media outlets, please keep supporting us. Please sort of tell everyone that our OPCW reports and so on are credible, even though Scott Ritter, you know, Iraqi weapons of mass destruction expert, is saying they're laughable, they're comical, they're cartoon reports, you know. So it's you know, this is a very, and I think also what is happening and what we're seeing with the Guardian article is this maintenance of not only conflict in Syria, but conflict among activists, conflict among truth seekers, journalists, independent media outlets, left-wing politicians, and so on. They're maintaining this wedge that they're driving between those basically that believe in the white helmet myth and those who are questioning it and those who outright discredit it. So they're maintaining that. Again, we're seeing them shutting the door on a peaceful resolution, on an actual investigation into what taxpayers' money is going into. And that's exactly, of course, what they're doing in every single conflict situation. They're preventing any sort of political peaceful resolution through maintaining a narrative that demonizes one party in that at that negotiating table.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. Thanks, Vanessa. We'll move on from Syria now, but stay with us. Now we're going to have a look at this this news outlet VG, which is Norwegian. And they published this article. VG exposed the largest child sexual abuse forum. It was run by the police. And basically what they're saying is that this was a major international police operation which had identified a website on the darknet called Child's Play, which was absolutely full of child imagery of sexual exploitation and child abuse. That between October 2016 and September 2017, a special police task force, as they describe it, based in Queensland, Australia, was able to quietly hack the site and had maintained the site and kept the site running for several months. One of the people involved in this was a guy called Paul Griffiths. He was heading up the Victim Identification Unit at Queensland Police Service State Crime Command's Task Force, Argos as it's called. He is originally a Greater Manchester Police officer, Greater Manchester in the UK, of course. He was one of the first child sexual abuse investigators in the world to conduct image analysis of child abuse images to try to determine the location of where the abuse took place. He moved on to the paedophile online investigation team at the National Crime Squad. He helped set up the Online Protection Centre, CEOP, the Child Exploitation Online Protection Centre, and eventually clearly has moved to Australia and got involved with this task force Argos. But Patrick, the question in my mind is where should the line be drawn? If the police are involved in doing this work to protect children, and particularly looking at child abuse and child sexual exploitation, where does it become inappropriate for the police to take over a website which is exploiting children and use that for intelligence gathering? Is that an appropriate thing to do?
This is a very good question, Mike, and one would hope that the great and the good in the mainstream media would ask such a question. But I'm afraid they probably won't, or very few will dare in this case. It comes down to there's two dynamics here that are really important on this story. One is that would the police be taking over this website for the purposes of trying to identify, let's say, the users of this website, or would they be taking it over in order to identify the children, the victims in the videos that are being uploaded and then sold and commercialized on this website? So those are two aspects of it. It could even be both. We're not privy necessarily to all the details of the investigation, but if material is being allowed to be uploaded and the continuation of the exploitation, the abuse of these children facilitated by a commercial forum like this on the dark web, then you have the police kind of facilitating an illegal crime syndicate, basically. So that is a problem and that needs to be looked at. At what point, is that permissible? Should they just shut it down and then continue their investigations, or is this? There's a big gray area, Mike, here between the crime and the so-called law enforcement, and in that gray area, I'm afraid to say, history does not bear out a very kind narrative in that gray area, Mike.
The bottom line is, should the police be allowed to commit criminal acts in order to prevent criminal acts?
Yes,
and that. There seems to be a major ethical problem here, and you wanted to highlight this, of course, not related to children.
No.
But here we have the FBI getting involved in criminal acts. In fact, encouraging criminal acts.
Not only encouraging, in this case, this is a tremendous story. The FBI, in effect, aided and abetted in a so-called terrorist attack in May of 2015 in Garland, Texas, in the United States. Now, we reported this at the time, Mike. I reported it on the day. I stayed up all night watching the coverage, and I put out our report. And this was our original assessment, and we absolutely got panned by everybody for this because we're too easy on the Muslim terrorist, right? It turns out that the FBI had an undercover agent on site supervising this attack. And the attackers were groomed by a paid FBI informant for at least up to 2 years, who was paid $120,000 to groom this young Muslim convert who was then shot dead. How they found out about this is quite amazing. There was one person shot in this. There were 40 security and special forces magically waiting for these two attackers to show up at Pamela Geller's Draw the Mohammed cartoon contest. And one security guard was shot in the foot, I believe, that he is suing the FBI. During discovery, this came out that the FBI had their guy on site. And so that's not only entrapment, Mike, that's aiding and abetting in a criminal act. And then the whole of the media, CNN and everybody, tried to spin this as some attack on America, an attack on free speech, incredibly. This is an unbelievable story on so many levels, but amazing.
Vanessa, in terms of this dark web website, how do you see it? Is the police overstepping the mark here?
Yes. It's a totally new story to me, so it's a little bit difficult to comment on it. But of course, and we're seeing this, we're seeing all of the institutions across all levels overstepping the mark, because basically when we look at the governments that are controlling these institutions, whether they're military, whether they're police, whether they're judicial, those governments themselves are rogue elements in our society, criminal elements in our society very often. Before we even get into deep state entities or to, the more clandestine dark power entities, we're heading into what seems to be, describing it as a bunny hole seems almost just not enough, but we just seem to be hurtling towards some sort of black hole. When we look at our media, when we look at our so-called non-governmental NGOs, when we look at institutions that are supposed to be brokering peace in the world, when we look at, as you say, the police organizations, the judicial institutions, all of them are corroded from the inside. And we are being governed by criminal entities across the board. Of course, there will be elements within that are white hats, let's say. This isn't a sweeping generalization, but it's a frightening aspect of where we're heading. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've mentioned it already, but let's bring it on screen. From Stop Wars Media on Trial event, which you're speaking at, Vanessa, and you as well, Patrick, headed up by John Pilger on Thursday the 19th of October, Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. Details are on eventbrite.com. Do get your tickets, £9 in advance, tenner on the door, I think. Let's just move on. Theresa May, if she hasn't already done it, is giving her briefing to the Tory party conference is over, so everybody's back in the school, Houses of Parliament today.
Everyone's got their P45s?
Some
have.
But she is going to say that the UK is seeking a deep and special partnership with the European Union. Achieving that partnership will require leadership and flexibility, not just from us, but from our friends, the 27 nations of the EU. But once again, we're looking at this deep and special partnership with the EU. But in the meantime, all the moves to stop Brexit from taking place continue. And as we know, over the period of the Tory party conference, Boris Johnson was being vilified in the press as being the person that was trying to undermine Theresa May's good work. Well, this week it's Philip Hammond, because Johnson's crowd are fighting back, and so we can now see the lines drawn. It's now Philip Hammond versus Boris Johnson. But here we've got Jessica Seymour, QC from Matrix Chambers. Sherry Blair's Chambers, I do believe, yeah. And she's written to Theresa May because she says she has been told by two good sources that Theresa May has been given some advice regarding Article 50 and that the allegation that the Article 50 notification can be withdrawn by the UK any time before the 29th of March 2019, which would of course result in the UK remaining in the EU on its current terms. So she is calling on the Prime Minister Theresa May to release this advice that she's allegedly received under the Freedom of Information Act. So this continues, and in the meantime, of course, they're playing up the no deal, the deal or no deal. Well, it's the no deal that's being played up. All kinds of people saying that Brexit is not going to happen. There's going to be no agreement. Therefore, there's going to be a disorganised leaving from the European Union. This is going to be a terrible thing. What's being played up here is fear of a disorganised Brexit in an effort to try to get the Remainers motivated to start campaigning, and so this charade of Brexit just continues, Patrick.
This is the Noel Edmonds dialectic of politics: deal or no deal. What's going to happen with Brexit? So I think it's again, we'll go back to everything that we've been saying for the last 18 months. Brexit doesn't look like it's going to happen. It might be a shock to some people, but I think you should sort of get used to that reality and then ask why, how it came to be that they've been able to drag their heels for 18 months and make the situation worse than it was probably before the referendum.
Absolutely.
Stroke of genius, I think,
yes,
by some people.
But look, it gets better, Patrick, because we now have a new national online hate crime hub. This is fantastic. It's going to be run by police officers in partnership with the National Police Chiefs Council. It's going to ensure that all online cases are properly investigated and will help increase prosecutions for online hate crimes.
That looks like a bot. So that's a virtual Bobby.
It's a virtual Bobby. Well, that's
a Bobby bot.
A Bobby bot, yeah. Okay, so let's see what Amber Rudd had to say. She said, online hate crime is completely unacceptable, which is illegal. Sorry, what is illegal offline is illegal online, and those who commit these cowardly crimes should be met with the full force of the law. So, Pat, I was just going to ask, is this the first example of online hate that is going to be reported to the new online hate hub?
Well, this is an incredible story here. This what happened here. What Dove, the soap and cosmetics company, they've run this advertisement here. I think this went on Facebook, didn't it?
Yes.
And it shows this lovely Afro-Caribbean girl here, or African girl here, and then she's taking off her shirt, and it's an allegory for how clean Dove makes your skin. And then what happens? Do you have the rest of this?
No, she turns white.
She turns white, and they show a white model. I mean, it's the most extraordinary thing. I don't know.
There was another version of the ad as well, where they had the black model on the left, they had an in-betweeny model in the middle, and they had a white model on the right. And on the left, on the board behind, it said before, and on the right, it said after. So you use Dove, you turn from what's on the left to what's on the right. It was incredible, but and we should just
look. Any self-respecting mainstream media journalist will look at that picture, Mike, and they should know exactly who placed that ad on Facebook. Had to be a Russian bot. It was Putin, right?
It must have been.
Must have been Putin.
And on that note, we're going to leave it for today. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you very much, Vanessa, for joining us.
And a great event yesterday. I just want to say congratulations to Ian R. Crane for AV 8.1, the Artificial Intelligence and Transhumanist Conference in Covent Garden yesterday. It was a sellout. In fact, they had to bring in more chairs because they didn't have enough space for everybody. And it was a tremendous. Dr. Graham Downing, myself, Brian Garish, Ian R. Crane, 4 great presentations, wonderful people there, Mike. It was a real success, and my hat's off to Ian for once again, over-delivering on expectations.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick. And we will see you again tomorrow at 1 p.m. as usual. See you then. Bye-bye.